Well, good morning, folks. I'm so excited. We have an inaugural show, the KC and KW show, where we are going to be talking, of course, about politics, the Republican Party, and where we go from here. So we're coming to you from our beautiful Riverside here in Stuart, Florida. A lot of politics happening here in South Florida, but also around the country. And so KC and KW, my co-host, we are going to be talking about that all through this show and upcoming shows to come. We're going to be here every Thursday at 10 a.m. We're a little delayed today. We had a few, technical difficulties here with our inaugural show, but we are ready to roll now. And we're very excited. We have a guest with us from Wyoming. We have David Iverson from Cowboy State Politics. So how are you doing, KW?
Great. Do I get to do? And here's Casey.
And here's Johnny.
All right.
Very good. So yeah, very exciting and wonderful. You've been a past guest on my radio show, and we always seem to talk a lot about the politics and have a very similar mindset about it. So
we do. It's exciting times. Yeah, and I think that this is a great opportunity for you and I to really give a voice to the conservative, shall we say, conservative constitutional followers. Certainly. In the state of Florida, but really throughout the nation, because as you know, you and I have really started to gravitate towards a national following, and I think that this is going to be a great platform for everybody to really follow, ask questions. We're going to have interactive calls. We're going to be able to bring people on. Very much now. Look, we're not going to try to replicate Rush Limbaugh, but we want people to dial in and talk to us.
Absolutely, and I'm also checking Facebook Live for comments. You can go to our Facebook page, KC and KW, and that's where we're going to be checking for comments. We're also on YouTube, so you can follow us there. If you're not on Facebook, we certainly understand that. So we have a lot of platforms that we're going to be utilizing and reaching out to YouTube a little bit more. That's a little new for me. So.
Well, we're breaking new ground.
And breaking into finally 2021.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, right, what is America built on? Independence, entrepreneurship. So, you and I are basically breaking some new ground here. So let's see if we can't get the American people to really start to share their thoughts and ideas with us. And as we start to talk about the hot topics, going into 2022.
Well, conservatives and patriots, it really is time to unite. And David, are you on the line with us?
Yeah, KC, I can hear you guys great. Good morning.
Good morning. So I am going to turn your volume up here a little bit. And David Iverson is with Cowboy State Politics in Wyoming. Can you tell us a little bit about Cowboy State Politics? And so happy to have you joining us.
I'd love to, and I'm delighted to be with you too. Like I was telling you before we went on air, I watched several of your online shows, and I was pretty impressed. So thank you for having me. Cowboy State Politics is the fastest growing conservative podcast in Wyoming right now. And really, it's one of the only ones. And just to give you like a brief history, it's only been in existence since December 2nd. And so since that time, we've had I checked the numbers this morning, but we're real close to 8,000 downloads. So basically in 3 months, the show has grown a tremendous amount. But basically what I cover is Wyoming politics, and sometimes I slip into complaining about Sleepy Joe and friends in the White House. But most of the show relates to politics that are happening in Wyoming. So some of the major topics right now, of course, we have our citizen legislature going on right now. Wyoming has sort of a different system than other states. We have a very short session every year, and of course the legislators have committee meetings throughout the year, but the actual legislative session is super, super short. It only lasts a little over a month. So some of the hot button issues, of course we have voter ID that we're fighting really hard for in Wyoming. I wanted to talk a little bit further about that today. Of course, Liz Cheney, and I think the whole country is talking about her. And a big issue we have in Wyoming is a group called the Frontier Republicans. And I spoke with KW a little bit, and I'd really like to explore that a little bit today. So there's a little bit about the show and some of the topics that we cover.
Well, David, that's going to be some really good topics, and very much look forward to it. I know there's a lot going on in Wyoming. Matter of fact, we have a new Florida resident, Donald Trump Jr., who just visited your state. He's rallying up. I know that you have some legislation over there going through your Senate, SF 145. where they're trying to pass legislation if a candidate does not get over 50% of the vote, then they have a runoff between the two candidates, the top two candidates.
Yeah,
So,
Senate File 1. Sorry about that.
no,
You guys are breaking up just a little bit, but just real quick on Senate File 145, it's to establish runoff elections in the primary. And Wyoming is basically a single-party state, so really whoever wins the primary wins the election. You know, there are Democrats in Wyoming. I think there's like 12 of them. No, I'm joking.
that's good. Yeah, we have a few more than that here in Florida.
But really, it's really difficult for a Democrat to win an election in Wyoming, though several governors ago we did have a Democrat that served 2 terms, Dave Frudenthal. Really, he did a pretty good job. But overall, it's pretty difficult for a Democrat to win here. So the Senate File 145 is super important because right now, I don't even know how many people we have running against Liz Cheney, but it's a lot. And what will happen is the vote will be split and somebody will be elected to the House of Representatives with like 20% of the vote, which is clearly not representative of Wyoming or any populace.
Right. It sounds like good legislation to me. I think that we could use it here in Florida, and I'll tell you what, even right here in our very county here, Martin County, Florida, we've had the same type of issues with county commission races. You have 5 people running, and somebody wins with 30% of the vote, and not exactly the overwhelming favorite, but that's what happens. So I hope the legislation passes. I know Donald Jr. was out there pushing for that to pass as well, and I think that, as you said, it was inspired with Liz Cheney, because I think she won by about 40% the last time out.
I think 38%.
38%?
Something in that range,
KW?
yeah.
So
Close enough.
it's close enough. So it definitely was not over
It was close
50.
enough for her.
Yeah, close.
Good point. Good point. Eric Miller and Brian Jones, appreciate you tuning in. Columbia County, Florida. Very good to have you on online here, Brian.
Hey, I have a question for Dave. So, Dave, do you think this is, we see this happening across the country? Really, it goes across both party lines where, essentially incumbents will sponsor or have their people sponsor essentially primary challengers to water down the vote. Do you think that's happening in Wyoming with Liz Cheney in a sense that people are being propped up to run against her in a primary, either directly or indirectly, so that essentially the vote does get watered down and she has a chance to get reelected, even though the populist vote would probably not elect her on a one-on-one basis?
Well, I don't have any evidence of that. I mean, that's the first time I've heard of it. However, there are people that are undoubtedly going to get into this race that do support the policies of Liz Cheney, and so it seems like a plausible scenario to me. And we all know that Liz Cheney doesn't play fair in any way. So I mean, I wouldn't put it past her people to prop up a candidate just to split out the vote. But the reality, KW, is that there's already enough people running that the vote's going to be split anyway. So I don't really know if that would be necessary for her.
Well, we can. I know we want to talk about the Frontier Republicans, but why don't we stay on Liz Cheney for just a minute, because this is, in fact, the number one subject that I'm aware of in the GOP, the Republican Party today. Obviously outside of the fact that Donald Trump didn't win the presidential election, whether it would be fair or not fair. And really the question, Dave, this is your home state, right? You're a Wyoming guy, Wyoming state politics. You interview the local politicians, you're interviewing the players, the folks that really make a difference on the ground there. Why is it, in your opinion, in the opinion of your, constituents, that Liz Cheney has not been removed from the GOP leadership? What is your thought there?
Well, she's part of the machine, man. I mean, she is fully entrenched in both the big swamp in Washington and the little swamp in Cheyenne. And there's this perception in Wyoming that we have to have a powerful legislator. And if you look through our history, Alan Simpson, Malcolm Wallop, unfortunately you can put Liz Cheney in there. At least one of our legislators has always been in some form of leadership. So there's this perception in Wyoming that we have to have that. And when you look at the whole state, I mean, we're the least populous state in the country. So our lone representative really doesn't have that much of a voice in Congress unless they're in party leadership. Now, the second reason why I think that she hasn't been removed from her position in the United States House of Representatives is she's a warmonger. If you look back at all of the policies that she has supported, she is fully entrenched with the defense industry. She's voted to continually keep our troops overseas, and her whole family history, really, with her dad, Dick Cheney. I mean, that's their whole shtick. They're fully entrenched in the defense industry, and they're the type of globalist people that want to keep continual war going on because it's good for people's pocketbooks. And I think that's probably the main reason why she hasn't been removed. And she is definitely supportive of the establishment in Washington, D.C. She voted to impeach President Trump. So, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know there. And quite frankly, it was that one vote that was the catalyst for us kicking her out of office.
And you know what? The other thing, too, you talk about the swamp in Washington, and I think Paul Ryan was just out there hosting a very large fundraiser for her. So you have this entrenched Republican group that's really controlling Washington, D.C., and that's something that at the show, KW, this is what we want to point out.
That's right.
Folks,
That's right.
just because they've been elected and they're popular with the media does not mean that they truly have Republican conservative principles. Brian Jones, he says, we in Florida must focus on replacing the Rube. He's a progressive rhino in name, too, kind.
Well, let's look at the facts for everyone, right? Who were putting the knives in Donald Trump's back the first 2 years of his presidency? Who was leading that
Oh,
charge?
the inside Republican.
Paul Ryan.
Right.
So what does it tell? What does it tell? The American population that Paul Ryan, who was essentially the leader of we'll call it the Night of Long Knives against Donald Trump, is essentially stepping up and propping up Liz Cheney.
Right.
Right. So I think to Dave's point, that kind of hits the nail on the head.
David's absolutely right. And as long as they keep their supporters around them, they remain strong. So that's why he's out fundraising in Wyoming and hoping that Liz Cheney gets reelected.
I have one more question for Dave on this one. I've heard, and I'm very plugged into the D.C., not the establishment, but the information chain, as they say, that Liz Cheney really is running the GOP, behind the curtain. What do you think, Dave?
Well, it's very possible. I mean, if you pay attention to mainstream media, which I try not to, it gives me a headache and I end up with broken TVs. But anyway, if you pay attention to those folks, there's a couple of Wyoming legislators that are pretty well front and center. One of them is Liz Cheney, the other is John Barrasso. And both of them are very much part of the establishment. And, as far as Liz Cheney goes, like I said, she is the perpetual war person in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's her family legacy, like I mentioned. So, I mean, it could be possible that she's got way more influence in the GOP in Washington than any of us really know about.
Well, let's take that example, and I think I must say it's the most recent, but in a recent press conference where she was on stage with Kevin McCarthy, who is the purported leader of the GOP today, essentially, and on a national audience newscast, she basically usurped him on stage in public. And basically, you could call it an embarrassing moment for McCarthy. You can call it an embarrassing moment for the GOP. But in reality, what she really said was, Donald Trump has no position in the party. He's not the future of the party. And, you could read the body language between Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney, at least in public. Now, whether that was for show or that was really her just exercising her control on stage, I don't know the answer. What do you think, Casey?
Well, I don't know the answer to that either. Of course, it's control. I will agree 100% with that. The more you control, the better, and that's what the establishment wants to do, and they are doing right now. This is where, I think that the Republican Party in general, and David, I'm sure this is what you're struggling with in Wyoming as we are across the country. The Republican Party, we have to have a future together, and we have to unite, and we can't have these factions. And
well, if I could jump in there real quick.
Yes.
I would say three things. First of all, that press conference was an embarrassing moment for Wyoming. That's number one. Number two is it is absolutely not true that Wyoming does not support Donald Trump. In fact, I mean, he won that election with probably, I think it was like 73, 74% of the vote in Wyoming. And everywhere you go, except the little swamp in Cheyenne, you find people that are 100% in support of Donald Trump's policies. You know, so first, Liz Cheney's an embarrassment to this state. Second, she doesn't have the support of Wyoming. And what that press conference showed you is that the folks in Washington, D.C. are, one, not interested in representing the views of their home state, but two, they're totally disconnected from it, and three, they really do think that they're untouchable. Now, the last thing that I would mention, and I kind of mentioned this to KW off the air a little bit, but last Saturday we had a great example of the power of the people, like individual voters in a state. In my home county, we had two corrupt politicians that didn't reflect the votes of our county. So we got a meeting going, and we kicked them out of office and replaced them with conservative people that would do the job. So what you're seeing in Wyoming, and hopefully across the country, is that people are tired of being ignored. And everything begins at the grassroots level because all politics is local. I mean, we all know that. But across the country, and certainly across the state of Wyoming, people are awake, and we're done with politicians like Liz Cheney, like Kevin McCarthy, like Paul Ryan. And, you know, we just have to send them a clear message in 2022 that their time of being the establishment people is over. And we have to make sure that message resonates with the entire country.
David, I have a question off Facebook for you. You partially answered it right now, but what is Wyoming doing about this? And is there any active movement to get Liz Cheney out right now?
Absolutely there is. There are, like, across our state, and, you know, Wyoming is a little bit different than other states. Okay, we have 23 counties, and in those 23 counties, we only have roughly 600,000 people. So, you know, we're pretty spread out. So most of the towns in Wyoming are pretty small. Like, I live in a town of, it's right around 5,000 people. So what's happening on the ground is our local parties, you know, so our local GOP, and there's a lot of different groups that are popping up, just normal everyday citizens that are done with this. And there's a lot of grassroots movement to get Cheney out of office. And the way that that's happening, like I said, it starts at the county level with county boards and with, you know, your city council and your county commissioners and those sorts of things. But there really is a movement to get rid of her. And, you know, everywhere you go in Wyoming, you can walk down the street shopping, and you'll talk to people that, you know, they're very open about, hey, we hate Liz Cheney, and we think she needs to go to the unemployment line. You know, I mean, but there really is a grassroots movement. And like I said, it's actually pretty exciting to watch, if you ask me.
I have a question, Dave. So you and I have talked, and this is, you know, which is why, you know, frankly, I wanted to bring you on the show with Casey and I about essentially what it's going to take to basically win the election. Let's call okay. So let's now agree that the populist vote on average wants Liz Cheney removed. Let's also understand that Liz Cheney is heavily backed by the establishment, heavily, probably the number one backed congressional candidate in the country today. And one would argue that she probably has unlimited funding if she needed it, you know, and push comes to shove, fight. And then you get into the fact that this has become essentially a national race. So while Wyoming has, you know, 500,000-600,000 registered voters, you know, I don't know the exact registered number, but let's just say 500,000, pick a number, or less. The real question is, Dave, with this being really a national race, and with majority of the money coming from outside, okay, into the coffers of Liz Cheney, okay, and her supporters, the question is, does anybody, in your opinion, have the what I'll call the gravitas, the national and local standing, and the ability to raise money to win and beat her in 2022? And this is a question for you locally. I mean, we have obviously views nationally, but this is something that's going to really be the driver, because if you have a series of candidates running against her, and they may be the highest quality caliber candidates in the local perspective, but may not have the ability to beat her on a national-based election. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, I think we have to discuss one thing before we talk about any of the candidates. And the first is there's a real push in the Wyoming legislature to change some of our election law. And first, you have to understand that at the local level, so in my county, at the last election, we had 100% voter turnout. Actually, it was 104% because there were some people that registered to vote at the polls. And in Wyoming, you can do that. But the problem with that is it allows what we call crossover voting. So, like, Wyoming is basically a one-party state, but there are Democrats who live here. So one of the things that happens is on Election Day, people go to the polls and they just change their registration to Republican so that they can vote for the candidate that they want. So that's one thing that we have to change. The other thing, and this is one that needs to be changed nationwide, but it's really going to help in Wyoming, is voter ID. We absolutely have to have that, definitely in the state of Wyoming, but definitely nationwide. So given that, if we can change those two things, most of the people that support Liz Cheney are your frontier Republican types, and I know we're going to talk about those folks here in a little bit, but they're the liberal Republicans. The Democrats are going to support Liz Cheney. So if we can handle that crossover voting problem, we can tackle that. Now, as far as fundraising and particular candidates, Wyoming's a little bit different because barring the cities of Casper and Cheyenne, most every other place is spread out, and they're all pretty small communities. So the candidates that are running right now, and I'm being a little hesitant to mention any one candidate, simply because I haven't interviewed them on my show yet. So I want to give them a chance. But there are two candidates that are running that I think are pretty rock solid. I mean, I've talked to both of them on numerous occasions. But, they're strong policy-wise. Now, the fundraising, that's another interesting question because I think in Wyoming terms, Liz Cheney is going to have unlimited funds. I don't think there's any question about that.
Right. Well, that's the Achilles heel that I think any potential primary challenger, even at the highest caliber, is facing.
I agree.
Yeah, and the two candidates that I'm thinking of, both of them have, in Wyoming terms, a pretty good fundraising effort going on. I think one of them, the rumor I heard is that he's well over $1 million raised already. But, the fundraising is going to be an issue because, like I said, you've got those big population centers of Casper and Cheyenne. And it's, just an aside note, in Wyoming terms, when I say big population, I mean like 40,000 people. It doesn't compare to other areas of the country. But, so, I mean, fundraising is going to be an issue. And, KW, you and I have talked a little bit that we're a little bit early in the congressional race, but on the other hand, those candidates are going to have to start fundraising right now, and I think a couple of them are doing that.
The grassroots is going to be very important for certain because of the money that's going to flow in from outside of Wyoming.
Absolutely.
And to that end, Brian had another good question, and he wants to know about your GOP chair. Are they involved? And he said each county chair needs to be vetted so we know what direction we have to go to make a difference and not rely on the political swamp. And KW, we have that same issue right
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that goes to the question of number one, is the Wyoming GOP fundamentally compromised?
Right.
In your opinion, Dave, are they fundamentally compromised, meaning by liberal rhinos, or are they on on our team?
They are so on our team, it's not even funny, KW.
Okay.
As far as the county chairs go, with the exception of the Little Swamp in Cheyenne, I mean, it's totally appropriate.
But
anyway,
that's a good one.
With the exception of Cheyenne and probably Laramie. Now, you'll notice that I haven't brought up Jackson because most people in Wyoming don't say the two words Wyoming and Jackson in the same sentence.
Is that as in Jackson Hole, Wyoming? Is that, just to be clear?
Yeah, they're just totally liberal, and they're we just kind of accept that they're the lone Democrat county in the state. But there are two other counties that are decidedly liberal. Well, actually three: Casper, Cheyenne, and Laramie. Now those chairs, I mean, they're always up in the air. I mean, I don't know if the county chair in Casper could be replaced. That's Frontier Republican headquarters right there.
Ah, okay, okay.
But the rest of the county chairs, I've talked to a lot of them, and they are rock solid conservatives. I mean, they are totally on our team. Now, as far as the leadership, I personally know the Wyoming State Chair, Frank Ethorn. He is as conservative as they come, and he is totally on our side as far as getting Liz Cheney out of office. The Wyoming State Vice President, David Holland, I had lunch with him last Saturday. He's a rock-solid, gun-loving, God-fearing conservative. So, and the rest of the leadership is too. But as far as the Wyoming State GOP, we're totally 100% with the cause of getting rid of Liz Cheney. And with the exception of those three that I mentioned, yeah, to answer that question, it's there's no question about the Wyoming State GOP.
That's really great to hear, David. It sounds like if somebody has infiltrated the Republican Party, you have a majority that can root them out. And that even though it's going to be tough, it sounds like that you have a good plan and a handle on these issues.
Well, here's a point that I think our listeners. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
Guys. So I mentioned earlier that one of them was Liz Cheney's campaign manager.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
If that tells you how on the ball we are about getting rid of Representative Cheney, yeah, that he is one of the ones that we kicked out of office.
Well, it's really important for our viewers and listeners to understand that there are GOP groups, REC groups, Republican Executive Committee groups in counties in other states that are willing to step up and do their job, regarding what these politicians have sworn to uphold and failed to uphold. And that's a problem that is facing Florida and other states. And we know that in our backyard here, where we have candidates who have gone against the Constitution, they have gone against the Republican Party principle. And because the Republican executive committees have been infiltrated, the leadership at the REC, the board and chair and vice chair, have blocked many member movements to censor a lot of these candidates. And we saw that in 2020, for example. And I think that Donald Trump basically let the genie out of the bottle on that as well, because that basically exposed, in my professional opinion, a lot of the liberal rhino. Okay, and so by having Arizona, by having Wyoming and other state and local party organizations come out and openly censor, any representative that didn't toe the line, was basically a very, very important message for the rest of the state GOP groups out there, as well as the rest of the other counties in each state, start towing the line, or they're going to get replaced.
Absolutely. You have to hold them accountable. And it starts with, a lot of people, and I've heard so many people tell me this, that when it's election time, they go to the polls and they see all these precinct positions and they really don't think that they matter. But the truth is they absolutely do, because when it comes to your county GOP meetings, it's the precinct people at the very basic level. You need to get in contact and make sure that they're representing your values. And, for everybody that's listening and watching the live feed, that is something that you can do. You can call your county clerk and say, I want to know who my precinct person is, and then call them involved. And that's, a lot of people think that, well, I'm just one person. What can I do? I'm just one voice. I do anything. And the truth is, one voice can do a lot. And if you need an example, look to the one rid of those two politicians. But you got to start at the local level, your precincts, and with your local GOP, and that's where it starts. Find out who these kick this.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, David. That is, I think, if we could define in a more eloquent term what you're saying, that is exactly the purpose of what Casey and I focus on.
That's right.
Is that a fair statement?
We need a strong core.
Absolutely.
And that's what you have there. That's very impressive to hear. And, as I'm listening to you, David, I'm thinking, how can we here with our locally KW, how are we going to
and you've got to replace the boards. Okay, but the
You
boards
do.
are really
What-
4 or 5 people. It's really a chair.
One other thing I wanted to mention, guys, is there's a great documentary called Rocky Mountain Heist. It's narrated by Michelle Malkin, and it's all about how the how the Democrats took over the state of Colorado. And you want to know where they started? At the precinct level.
Yep.
And that's how they turned Colorado from a red state to a blue state. So
Right.
I mean, it's a perfect thing, and I'd encourage your viewers and your listeners to go watch it, because it will tell you exactly how that state turned to a solidly Democrat stronghold.
Yeah, we're starting to see that across, not only in Florida, but we're also seeing it across the country.
Arizona.
Right, absolutely. Georgia, I mean, you saw the grassroots effort by Stacey Abrams over the last 3 or 4 years to really capture the local, leaving fraud aside, to capture a lot of the local critical county activities. And you're absolutely right, Dave. That is what we're facing. And the fact of the matter is, people have to wake up. And that's one of the reasons I think we wanted to really do this show, was to wake people up and to give them direction, in general terms. We can't tell them how to do things specifically locally, but to wake them up to the facts that they have to get involved, because if they don't get involved, going into 2022, you're going to get not only the same old, but we're sliding down a slippery slope that I don't think we're going to recover from on many, many levels, especially fiscally and with our national debt. Because right now it's spend other people's money, which is my money and your money.
For certain. And David.
Exactly right. If you want a great example of that, another county in Wyoming, it's the energy capital of the world. If you hear the word coal, it's this county where it comes from in America. So they have a local board. It's a board that runs their cemetery district. Yeah, I mean, this is going to blow your mind. Well, the cemetery district has like $4 million in the bank. So the board that controls that decided to spend $20,000 to join the tourism association. What the heck does a cemetery board do with tourism?
That's
Ghost tours.
I know, it's funny, isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
But, what it was is liberal people got on that board, and they're like, "Ooh, look, a giant pile of money.
Spend the money.
Let's
Spend the
use
money."
it for our own purposes."
Well, that's the grab, and Dave, you're absolutely right, and that's the problem. Whenever there's a pile of money, it doesn't matter whether it's a state municipal coffer, or whether it's in private hands or a nonprofit. There's going to be a grab for that money, and therein lies the challenge. But why don't we transition over now to talking about I guess you call them the frontier Republicans?
Yes, I'd be interested.
And tell us and give us a little quick background, an elevator pitch, but then tell us how that translates into the problem we're having with Liz Cheney. And really the broader problem, I think that was going to represent a broader problem we have in the party, because the frontier Republican can probably be something else in another state, but essentially, I would assume it's a fake Republican. But you tell us.
Yeah, the frontier Republicans are totally fake. They are the type of people that they run around the state saying, "I love guns, I love God, I hate abortion." And
I know a few of those.
That's how they go. And then they go to Cheyenne, and they vote entirely the opposite. Just to give you an example, there's a Democrat from Jackson. Now, Jackson is the ultra-rich movie star place in Wyoming. Okay? They are solidly Democrat. But one of them votes far more conservative than most of the Republicans in the state legislature. Okay? So in Wyoming, we don't really have a problem with Democrats. They're the honest ones. Okay? The problem we have is with the Republican Party, that we've got a whole bunch of elected officials that have an R by their name, but really, if they were being honest, they would be Democrats. So here's how it all started.
I know some of those too.
That's the coal center of the country, like I mentioned. There was a group that basically they got kicked out of office, their local offices, precinct level things. And they were all disappointed that they weren't elected officials anymore. So they formed what are called the Frontier Republicans. And when they came out, it was all of this, we need to be nice to each other. We need to have civility. We need to be united. All of the buzzwords that you hear nationwide and in every other state. I'm sure you've heard it in Florida. And they started attacking our rock-solid conservatives for just being big meanies. And it sounds funny, but that's exactly what they did. So that kind of morphed into the group, and they're not like none of them have like a card that says I'm a member of the Frontier Republicans. Okay, but they all have that same ideology that your basic establishment Republican has, that it's okay to compromise on guns, that it's okay to compromise on abortion, that we can tax a little bit more because we need these things. Okay, so they're all the people that want to compromise. And in Wyoming, it's I don't want to say that it's created a split in the party, but in some ways it has. So if you look at the Natrona County is Casper. So if you look at a map of the state of Wyoming, Casper's dead center. Okay, it's one of the population centers. But the county chair there, his name is Joe McGinley. He is like the frontier Republican, very, very liberal, doesn't vote the conservative line. Now, you also have a number of very wealthy people that have joined this cause, that they shy away from conservative values and that they don't support the Republican platform. And for your listeners, the Wyoming Republican platform very much mirrors the national platform. I mean, there are things on there like we don't believe in abortion, we believe in the Second Amendment, we don't believe in taxes, those sorts of things. Everything that you would associate with a conservative Republican. So anyway, this group is like really well funded, and one thing they did recently is they bought a bunch of billboards to put along I-80. So I-80 runs all the way across the state of Wyoming on like the very southern portion. So it runs from Cheyenne all the way to Green River, which is the border between Wyoming and Utah. Okay, so all along that interstate, there's these billboards that say, "Thank you, Liz Cheney, for supporting the Constitution." Now, to put it to a larger context, everybody's heard of the Lincoln Project. So the Lincoln Project and these frontier Republicans are basically one and the same critter. They are the people that just absolutely hate Trump. That's their first mantra. And the second one is they want to do all of the progressive Republican things that you see across the country. But the thing is, they are the folks that will go around the state and claim to support the Second Amendment, claim to say that we shouldn't be having abortions, and then they go to their state legislatures and they vote exactly the opposite. So I hope that explains who and what the frontier Republicans are.
Well, David, I think that's one of the issues that we have to work on nationally, and you kind of touched on it with those billboards. It's a brainwashing, and there's of people that are not that in tune or involved with politics. So they see that board and say, "Hey, she's a constitutionalist. I'm going to vote for her," and that's all they know. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you get people that are not engaged to really vote the way they think they're voting?
Well, that is a tall order because you have to educate people, and that's one of the things that I really try to do on my program is to educate people in a way that one is interesting, and two that people will listen to, because a lot of people, they just vote the Republican Party line and they think that that's great.
Yep.
But it's really easy to place a label on a political campaign. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm a conservative. Those things are easy, but you have to challenge those people on, okay, so what parts of the Constitution do you agree with? Which, of course, is a loaded question, because if you don't agree with, you have to agree with the whole thing. It's I say that being a conservative is a lot like being pregnant. I mean, you can't be kind of pregnant.
You either are or you're
That's
not.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, as it relates to the Constitution, you can't support just one part of it and not the rest of it. So you really have to pin these people down in public meetings, on Facebook, everywhere, and you have to make them answer the charge. Now, as far as the people that really aren't that engaged politically, it takes a real effort to educate them.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. That's the educate. That's exactly why we're here, David, because we want to educate the voters. Not only, really, it's just across the USA, And the second point I want to kind of make sure we press here with everyone is this is not an either or. It's either you are or you're not, right? Not that, you don't. It's not a selection of the Constitution. It's not a cherry picking of the Constitution. Either you are supportive of the U.S. Constitution or you're not. And I think that's where the progressives, well, in fact, we know the progressives in the Democratic Party want to make it. They like to use the term living, breathing document. Okay. I don't see any movement in that document. Do you?
Well, and that is one of the biggest challenges when talking about the Constitution, because progressives have convinced people that that the Constitution is a living document, which nothing could be further from the truth. The Constitution is the most brilliant political document ever written. And, granted, I think it's as close to perfect as you can get. So what you have to do is challenge people when they say, well, the founders didn't think that we would. Let's take the Second Amendment, for example. Okay, I'm a big gun guy. Well, I live in Wyoming, so they two kind of go together. But when I'm confronted with the argument that says, the founders couldn't ever have imagined AR-15s, for example. Well, actually, they probably did. Maybe not the exact weapon. But the reason why the Second Amendment says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed is they knew they were brilliant enough to know that there were going to be things that will be invented that they had no idea of. AR-15s, for example. So arms, in the terms of the founders, is defined as things that you can carry. So a rifle, a pistol, those sorts of things. And the whole militia comment in the Second Amendment, it's fully there. The whole reason why the Second Amendment is there is so that we have the world's largest standing army. That's what a militia is. It's all able-bodied men, 18 to 45. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's what you'll find. So the Second Amendment means that the people can have arms equal to that of the military so that they can defend their liberty, right? So the whole argument of the living Constitution, you can say, well, parts of the Constitution are intentionally vague, right? So what are arms? What is cruel and unusual punishment on down the line? Well, our founders were brilliant enough to know that those things would probably change. Now, there are other things in the Constitution that are very specific. The First Amendment, there should be no establishment of religion. That is very specific. So the main argument against all of these folks and their living Constitution BS is that, no, you're actually wrong, and let me explain it to you. But you have to come from a stance of knowledge. What everybody is fully aware of the the vitriol that comes with Facebook comments. A lot of what you get is, no, you're wrong. No, I don't believe in that. And there's no explanation to it. So conservatives need to work really hard to make the argument. And that's really what we're not that good at.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Yeah, I wanted to. We don't want to go too far off base because we probably want to have you back for some broader subjects. But let's just let's kind of dial it in for the listeners. And I also want the Wyoming folks and we'll send you a clip of this to hear you share your view. And let's call them out, right? So let's be clear. The frontier Republicans in Wyoming support Liz Cheney, yes or no?
Yes, they do.
Okay. The frontier Republicans in Wyoming are progressive in their thinking. Is that a true statement or a fair statement?
Absolutely 180%.
Okay. And so if they are supporting a candidate who is not essentially for and of and by the people, and they are progressive in their thought process in the form of essentially looking to somehow breach or interpret the Constitution of the United States in a different form than written, wouldn't we declare them to be not conservative?
Absolutely. They are not conservatives at all in any way.
Right. So then how can they call themselves Republicans, David? What is the basis for this group in Wyoming to call themselves frontier Republicans? Because that sounds Wild Westish.
It does.
Doesn't it, Casey?
It does.
It
It
reminds
does.
me of somebody who's carrying a gun. They're out there on their horse.
Protecting their liberties.
They're out there. They're for the Constitution. They're for America. But that's not the case, right, David? What is the case?
It's exactly the opposite. And the reason why they chose that name is because it, like Casey said, it does sound like you're out there on your horse somewhere, fixing fence and feeding your cows. But nothing could be further from the truth. They really are like a clandestine group that their main mission is to deceive.
So are they basically the cloak and dagger, fronting the money, the support, the out-of-state apparatus for Liz Cheney? Is that basically what they are? So everybody who is going to listen to this now and in the future will understand that the frontier Republicans in Wyoming are not conservative. They don't basically speak for the broader population of Wyoming, and they basically are essentially part of the establishment.
They are definitely part of the establishment. Now, I couldn't speak to outside funding because, frankly, I don't think that it's necessary because they're pretty well funded within the state.
Okay.
Like I said, there's probably some progressive groups. One of them is called Better Wyoming. They're a total Green New Deal type of outfit. And across the country, for your listeners too, whenever you hear of a group like Better Wyoming or Frontier Republicans that has a really great sounding name, you need to look into them because the truth is probably somewhere way off from what they're espousing. So any of these groups that you get mailers from or that you get emails from, you really need to look into them and find out exactly what that group believes. Because in my experience and across, in Wyoming, those groups do not have your best interests at heart. And secondly, they're definitely not conservative. It's like we accuse Democrats all the time of, they're doing exactly the opposite of what they claim they're doing.
Dave, I have a question for you.
The People Act is exactly the opposite of that.
Absolutely, Dave. I have a question for you, and I'm speaking ahead of myself here because I haven't actually got permission from KC.
Oh no! All right, KW.
But what about what? I mean, it's early, but it's not too early. And it seems to me that we need to basically help you bring attention to this challenge and problem that you're having in Wyoming. I mean, not that you can't handle it there, but because it is such a national race, because there's so much money coming in from the outside as well, because Liz Cheney is so establishment backed, and because fundamentally, look, Jackson is really not Wyoming. It's really California and all of the Hollywood and liberal elites, right? So
Exactly right.
what about? And I'll throw this out there, and I'm not going to commit because I haven't got permission from the boss yet. But what about at some point in the future if we said, hey, Casey and I and you would get together and we would do a town hall meeting of some form out there under the America First platform where we basically tried to do an awareness meeting and discussion with the patriots in Wyoming. What do you think about that?
I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that any attention we can bring to the progressive left is a good thing. And it's like you and I were talking before. We're all on the same team here, and we all want the same goal, and that, for this conversation, that's to get rid of Liz Cheney. Send her back to Virginia, where she's actually from, and to that end, any attention we could bring to that issue would be helpful.
Okay.
And
okay. Well, I'm just throwing it out there because we need to bring national.
On this one.
Yeah. We need to bring national attention to this. And I know that Matt Gaetz went out there and had a little step, but that's not what we do. We don't come out there and just do, stump politics. We really want to talk about the issues. And I'm just throwing that out there. Now, before we, finish on this one subject, I do want to bring up something, and Casey, I'm not sure if you followed this, that John Barrasso, who's a senator from the state of Wyoming, a federal senator, publicly, I believe he went on MSNBC, but correct me if I'm wrong, David, and basically said he supports Liz Cheney. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, he did, man. Like the swamp creatures have shown themselves for who they really are, and he did go on MSNBC and say that he supports Liz Cheney, which I'm glad that he did that.
He's a Republican, right? Let me be clear. He's a Republican. He's a Republican, right, Dave?
Oh yeah,
Or at least he says he is.
I know, but Republican, yeah.
Frontier Republican, right?
I'm getting all exercise now.
You know what, David? We have a comment off Facebook, and this is talking about people getting involved and doing the right thing. He talked about committeemen. He said that he was a committee man formerly, and he says that about 30% of counties have committeemen. So there's a lot without. And I don't know if that statistic's correct or not, but certainly committee men and committee women are extremely important to the party on the grassroots level. How do you see in Wyoming? Do you have committee men for each county, or do they need to be beefed up?
Okay, so the way it works, probably my guess is it works pretty much the same way in just about every county across the country. But the way that works is your county party is in Wyoming. We select a state committee man and a state committee woman to go to the state central committee and represent the interests of their county. Now, it kind of depends on how strong your county party is, because if you don't elect one, they don't go to the state party. Let me give you a classic example. So I mentioned what happened in Johnson County a little. Johnson County is where I live again. What happened last Saturday? So we had to revote all of our officers because the leadership didn't follow our bylaws. So had we not revoted, then the state would not have seated our state committee man and our state committee woman. Now, my guess is, let's just talk about precinct people for a little bit. So in Wyoming and in my county, after the election, there were a lot of precincts that didn't have representation. Like, nobody elected anybody. It's just because there wasn't, I guess, any interest, or nobody thought it was important to do that. And my guess is that's probably the case in some other counties across the country. So if you're not aware of state committee people or precinct people where you live, then you need to call your county clerk and say, hey, who's got these positions? And there's probably going to be a lot of vacancies, because that's always the case here in Wyoming, that they're just nobody ran for it. But that's an easy way to get involved. But first you got to find out where those vacancies are, and like I say, if there isn't a vacancy, then start going to meetings and get yourself appointed.
100%. David, another topic here a little bit, social media. One thing I really noticed here in Florida, the Democrats in particular have a good handle on using social media to boost their agenda. For example, you'll see conservative post and they attack the conservatives. You'll look at the Democratic post and the conservatives are silent. So how do you, how are you handling that in Wyoming?
Okay. Well, you've touched on a really important topic, and I think it's much broader, so I'll try to be brief for you. But conservatives tend to be the people that want to be left alone. I say all the time on my program that most people in Wyoming are really libertarians. We don't really care what you do in your own house, but just make sure that you leave me the heck alone. But where that creates a problem in politics is we don't get involved. You see, the left, they're the people that are always demonstrating. They're always out in the street. They've always got a machine working. And when a conservative posts, like myself, when I post something on Facebook, man, do the long knives come out? And you have to have the broad shoulders to take those attacks and to defend your position. You see, conservatives are really good at telling people why we believe the way that we believe, but we really kind of stink at making the argument as to why you should believe that way too. And it goes back to being an educated voter. It's real easy to put a comment on Facebook, right. And a lot of these left-leaning trolls. You'll see it all over the place, right? It's real easy for them to attack a conservative, but they're not used to being challenged. And any time that you get a vitriolic response from one of these left-leaning people, like a real nasty comment, that you've hit a button.
Yeah. Because
that's the only response they have, and Sure. It goes back to classic argumentation. Like, I'm a big debate guy. That's how I paid for college. And when people resort to attacking you personally, you're a bad person for being a Republican. They do that because that's the only argument they have left.
Absolutely.
So the response is, as far as social media goes, to answer your question, Casey, is to stand your ground and to present the logical argument to them. Make them give you an example. When people say Liz Cheney supported the Constitution, okay, explain why. Point it out in the Constitution. Which part was she supporting?
Well,
Exactly.
Give me an example.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit a great point, Dave, and you know that I basically did a little bit of a dabbling in some of the social media in Wyoming before this show over the last week, just to kind of get a little bit of a feel for who's who in the zoo, and so initially I did it. I typically would do it on off of more the America First or a formal portal, but I did it in my personal name just because I wanted basically people to interact, and you saw that we basically had the liberals come out of the woodwork and just go to work on me.
They do.
And so then we basically said, okay, let's take your line, Dave. Let's post the issues. So I went through, I think, 10 issues, and I did 10. I think it's 8 to 10 separate posts on the First Amendment, Second Amendment, health care. Pick all the hot topics, and we said, okay, here are the issues. Tell us what you think. And all they could revert back to were personal attacks. Okay. And therein lies the point you're making. But this is a point for our listeners and for our movement going forward and going into 2022 and 2024, which is this. KC, we have to fight. The conservative, Republican, or just the conservative voters have to fight. We have to fight internally. And then once we're done internally fighting, stand the line when it comes to the general elections, and et cetera. Because that's exactly where Dave is coming from, is that we don't fight. The left fights, and they fight all day long, but then they stick together like a den of thieves in the election. So whether they have a policy or not that makes sense, they don't really care. They stick together. I think we could all agree that the liberal leftist policy right now in D.C. isn't a policy at all. It's just spend other people's money, but they stick together. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. And, like I said, we're on the right side of things. The side of the Constitution is the right side. But you have to be able to make the argument. And, and you were kind of facing sort of a Wyoming-esque attack. Wyoming is very resistant to outside forces, unless, of course, your name is Liz Cheney, in which case you're all about funding from outside sources.
I was going to say my middle name was Cheney, but
but you were getting a lot of the
right.
Hey, this guy's from Florida.
Right.
What the heck is he doing?
Right.
And
right.
so you have to make the argument that we're all on the same side of this.
Yes.
We all want Liz Cheney out of office, and nobody should really like the frontier Republicans. So that's the first argument you have to make, and then the next part of it is we all support the Constitution, in its original form, in its, in its brilliance. We have to support. Here's what it says, and once you do that, then I think it comes a little bit easier. But I was listening to a radio program yesterday. I don't remember which one, but the host made a really good point that. Democrats are really good at telling you what the benefits are. Mm-hmm. Republicans like to tell you what the features are.
Right.
And this goes back to marketing. And KW, you know this,
yeah.
right?
You're buying a car. Is you buying a new car or a used car?
There you go.
Well, Casey, what do you think?
What I'm saying is
I'm sorry.
that you have to tell people why it's important to
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
What does freedom mean to you? It's super hard to explain to try to sell somebody freedom when they think they're already free.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why you need the argument to be able to say, hey, these policies are not about freedom.
Well, let's talk about
this is what freedom is.
Let me.
You have is socialism.
Let me throw one thing in there, and I threw a comment out there. And Casey, this I'll give you. David was aware of it. You probably aren't. They have a population. What is the population? About 600,000 right now, David, give or take?
Yeah, around 600 grand.
Right, okay.
Okay.
So with the current immigration crisis and the forecast growth and the fact that we probably have the estimates are 15 to 20 million illegal aliens / immigrants in the country today before any additional immigration, which is ongoing. Mm-hmm. So I threw the comment out I threw the meat out to the progressives. Well, the millions in Wyoming. And they all came back and said, well, you don't know history. We only have 500,000, 600,000 people. And then, of course, I let it sit and stew for a little bit. Then I went back with the immigration curve, and I said, how many people do you really have in Wyoming, and how many people are you going to have in Wyoming in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Do you really know? And, I'm not saying that there are 2 million illegal aliens in Wyoming. What I'm saying is they're coming.
I'd like to know where they're hiding if there are.
Well, it's a big place, right? There's a lot of ranches. But the point of the matter was really is to say, do you really know?
No.
Okay, that's the message, right? Do we really know? And so are you really making a valid argument? Or are you just talking, again, are you
Right.
preaching at us with the progressive rhetoric, right? But, Wyoming is so important, Casey, because although it's a small state, it's a huge state. But look, I think it's ground zero for the 2022 elections. That's my personal view. David, I don't know how you feel. Casey, you can share with it. Because Liz Cheney and the Bush machine, who basically, that's how it started back in the day, right? And going back to Reagan, but Reagan really wasn't tied into that progressive movement. Dick Cheney and that machine basically, they basically built this power base.
Right.
They built this power base with the military-industrial complex. They built this power base with outside money and outside forces. And, Dick Cheney is a Wyoming man, but that doesn't mean Liz Cheney is good for Wyoming, okay? And I think that's the message that I think Dave is saying to us, and we want to say to the country is, despite the fact that Dick Cheney is from Wyoming, that he does have a ranch there, and his daughter uses that ranch as her address, and just because she built the log cabin... And just because she built the log cabin in Virginia doesn't make her a good representative for Wyoming.
So let me just clear something up real quick. Okay, so Dick Cheney does have a ranch, and it's right outside of Casper. Okay, but the address that Liz Cheney uses is her palatial mansion in Jackson.
In Jackson, right? Okay. I stand corrected.
By the way, Matt Gaetz was right when he said he has spent more time in Wyoming in the last year than Liz Cheney has, and I think he spent a whole 45 minutes here.
Oh, KW.
Let me just comment on that. Well, go ahead, Casey, and then I'll comment.
No, I'll let you comment first, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I think that Wyoming is ground zero for 2022 and 2024 for a number of reasons. And let me just speak to the broader point first. So Wyoming is the most conservative state in the country, but we're facing some pretty serious liberal challenges. And if you look at the tax-mageddon that's going on in our Wyoming state legislature right now, it's a perfect example. But I think that Wyoming is ground zero for liberty. There are more guns in the state of Wyoming than, well, in fact, the guns outnumber the population probably about 20 to 1. But we are ground zero for freedom. And if you want to know what true liberty is, then you need to come to Wyoming and see how we live. That we really do live liberty. And if we don't defeat Liz Cheney, and if we don't defeat the progressives that are in control of our government and they're trying to take over our states, the game's over, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. And when I say that Wyoming is ground zero, first, I mean it in terms of liberty. But second, in terms of 2022, we've got a chance to kick out the warmongering, liberal, progressive Liz Cheney. And if we don't do that, then it just gives one more leg up to the liberal machine in the swamp.
Well,
KW is exactly right, that this is ground zero, and we have to fight for it. If we don't, then Wyoming's probably going to turn to a purple state, and I'll probably move to my cabin, which wouldn't be a bad place. Anyway. It is ground zero for so many reasons, and I can't express to your listeners how important it is.
And David, I appreciate that, and this is exactly what I want to share for your listeners as well, and also every Wyoming, why I personally am involved, why KC is involved, why America First is involved, is because of those exact reasons. So it's not that outsiders want to come in and try to tell Wyoming residents what to do, how to do it. It's because it's so critical that we make the stand in Wyoming, because look, I said it from day one, if we don't the GOP is not going to remove Liz Cheney from leadership. We have to do it at the ground level in the election. So you knock two birds out with one stone. You knock her out of Congress, she's out of leadership by default. That's the message, and we've got to drive that message home. And these frontier Republicans, we got them here in Florida. They're in Texas. You call them different things.
That's right.
But you know what? You can call them a fake Republican. You can call them a rhino, Casey.
Right.
I call them liberal Democrats, but
there are many names, and they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
KW and David, believe it or not, we have zoomed right by an hour, so
All right.
we'll start winding down here a little bit. I know it. There's so much. So David, we have to have you come back because there's so much to talk about, and it's thank you. What you stated about Liz Cheney, it's very well said. Both of you, KW and David, certainly agree that it's ground zero. And if Wyoming cannot root out a bad actor there, we are in trouble.
Yeah.
We definitely need to make sure that happens. I'm going to kind of finish up here. There's a couple comments on Facebook. Ken Vreeland, until we have an independent, unbiased, free speech search engine or internet network providers, all of this will fall on deaf ears. Conservative organizations cannot rely on Google, Twitter, or Facebook socialist censors. This should be the number one priority at this stage of the game. You're right, Ken.
yeah.
The censorship from the social media has been over the top.
Well, the state of Florida, at least on paper, is leading the charge on that because Ron DeSantis, our governor, is essentially trying to impose penalties on, we'll call it the social media companies for any discrimination in any form. So I think that's something Montana should consider as well. I mean, if we can take it at the state level, that might be a way to go. Because you can usurp essentially, the fact that they have all of this immunity and this broad-based, basically license to do what they want under Section 230 of the FCC. So that's a great point.
Absolutely it is. And Brian, Brian Jones, speaking of this, I mentioned this to KW, constructing a vetting database for all GOP members, vote record, bills introduced, etc. Need a clearinghouse site to make it easy for all to vet as needed. Great idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, that comes back to the fake Republicans.
I've got something on that one, Casey.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a website in Wyoming. It's called Evidence-Based Wyoming. It's run by this guy named Doug Gerard. I just interviewed him, and it does exactly that. You can look at the whole voting record of one of your legislators, and it will tell you whether they side with the Democrats or whether they side with the Republicans. And trust me, that guy, he loves to talk. So he would love to help out anybody else to do the exact same thing. But go check out that website. It's called the Legislative Analysis Tool. It's really fascinating. I mean, you can tell exactly where your legislator is voting. It's super cool.
That does sound super cool, and what a great idea, and it's certainly needed.
We need that nationally, yeah. Well, vetting the candidates is on our top, I'd say 5 list,
Yes.
going into 2022 across the board. Dave, I would like you to, I understand let me just close on this on my side. I understand you're going to be interviewing the declared primary challengers to Liz Cheney systematically. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That's already in the works.
So next time we have you on, you can give us a report on what you see, where we are, kind of the state of the union of the primary challengers that at least have been declared, and we can talk maybe more about that because that's going to get back into the question of can anybody beat Liz Cheney, or
Right.
who can remove Liz Cheney?
Right. No, it'd be.
Well, I can answer that one for you right now. The state of Wyoming is going to remove Liz Cheney.
Okay. All right. Then we need a name to tag that to.
That'll happen. It'll be an interesting vetting process to follow for certain. And again, with you being ground zero, couldn't agree more. It's something that will be followed across the nation. So
This is absolutely in the news every single day. If you look on social media or any of the major, I hate to say it, major news channels because I'm not even sure what's news anymore. This Liz Cheney is in the news every day because of the leadership position, because of the schism with the Trump followers, and a lot of other things brewing in the state of Wyoming. So I think it's only going to get more and more, vociferous as we go forward.
Absolutely.
Well, and if you wouldn't mind, could I mention just a couple things before we go here?
Yes.
So the first thing is a very interesting thing is happening in the state of Wyoming with regard to all of these health mandates, and I would encourage your listeners to check it out. there's been a major lawsuit filed against the governor, the state health officer, and all 23 county health officers for their abuse of the Wyoming state constitution and the U.S. Constitution. So there's that fight that's being fought also, and I would encourage your listeners to check it out. You can go to my website. There's links on there. That's cowboystatepolitics.com. But I don't want your listeners to think that we're losing the battle, because I don't think that we are. I mean, I think that at the grassroots level, the conservatives are winning. We're starting to win the battles, and this isn't a battle that is small. This is a battle for the republic. Mm-hmm. And I'm a student of history, as KW is too. And I don't know you well enough, Casey, to say you are, but I'm just going to assume that you are. But this is a battle for the republic, and we are winning. We are winning. And if you look at that lawsuit that was filed against Governor Gordon, and there's some of them that are happening across the country, they're just not being reported on. So it shows like mine, Cowboy State Politics, and it shows like yours, that are really in the fight, and it's just up to us to keep getting the message out so that people understand that the fight is happening, and that it's one that we can win.
I couldn't agree with you more, David, and
Great.
Appreciate your voice here today. There's so much more to talk about. I think with the defeat of Donald Trump for president, it really woke conservatives up. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that there's voter integrity moving forward. Cut out election fraud. So there's a lot of topics here, and I'm swinging into a different topic we shouldn't touch on today because we could talk another hour about that. But definitely.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your voice. Again, this is David Iverson with Cowboy State Politics joining us by phone. What a pleasure it has been to have you on today. And KW and I certainly both appreciate it greatly. And
Absolutely.
we'll keep getting the good word out.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'll come back anytime you want.
We're going to hold you to that, David. Thank you. So,
all right.
Thanks.
Have a good day, guys.
You too, David. Thanks so much.
Take care, Dave.
Folks, we're going to be coming live to you every Thursday at 10 a.m. KC and KW will have different guests on. We're going to be talking about the Republican Party, the conservative voice in America, what we need to do moving forward to make sure our voices are united and we have the right people elected in office, right from a local level right through the federal, national level.
Absolutely. Right now it's all about the community becoming active and and talking about the issues. And so our job is to try to give you all of the issues and give you the guidance. But at the end of the day, you have to do it yourself, right? We're only two people,
100%.
and everybody has to take responsibility. So we're looking forward to helping you on this journey.
And the takeaway today is every person matters. Everybody that has a voice, use it.
Absolutely.
It's very important.
Absolutely. America first.
One person makes a difference. That's
Yeah.
right. So thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, and hope to see you next week, Thursdays at 10 a.m. Take care.
Bye-bye.